Hey everyone, I don't normally do an intro to these peak PHP recordings, but for this one I wanted to do a quick intro because it's a little bit different than talks we've had in the past. Previous videos have been just a single topic and that's the content for the entire time. But this one ended up being a lot more of a discussion slash Q&A. So there are a lot of different topics that got covered. So if you look in the description below, there will be a list of some of the questions that we answered and some of the timestamps where you'll find them in the video. So if you want to jump straight to that particular uh, discussion, you can go right ahead. Or if you want to watch the whole thing clear through, it is kind of long. I appreciate your stamina, but hope you enjoy it. And with that, we'll get into the meat of it.
Hi, Brian.
Hi,
How are you doing?
pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, connecting from Kenya and looking forward to a successful session today.
Awesome. Great to have you.
Yeah. How is the pandemic on your end?
Sorry, say that again?
How is the coronavirus affecting you on, is it Colorado?
Yeah, I'm in Colorado. It's not too bad here, but in the U.S., it's not as good as it could be. Um, kind of a lot of the southern states, even California. I think California mostly because it's one of the more populated states. Um, they're all kind of experiencing a lot more new cases. It dipped down for a while, and now it's coming back as states are starting to open up. Um, so we'll see what they do if they start. I know some places have kind of slowed down their reopening plans to try to keep people safe, at home. Uh, Try to keep people from spreading it even more. But yeah, I mean, I managed to stay out of the line of fire uh, so far. So uh, luckily enough, in this industry, it's really easy to work from home, and I work for a company that is totally okay with that. I work on a project where I don't need to go into the office. Um, I actually there was an email went out this morning that they're talking about devising a plan for when they're going to reopen the office and when people are going to start going back, and asking people, if they want to come back, what their plans are, what they want to do, how frequently, that sort of thing. And I sent back, I'm perfectly happy to work from home indefinitely. And I'm certainly not going to rush going back to the office. And I said something like, consistently fewer than 10,000 cases in the state and consistently downward trending. Right now, we're about, I think, 29,000 cases, active cases in Colorado, which is definitely on the low end of states in the U.S. But still, I don't have any reason to rush back to the office.
Oh. And you're productive working from home?
Yeah, I've worked from home on and off for the past, I used to say the past 5 years, but now it's probably more like 6 years. Um, for companies, my last job, the headquarters was here in Colorado Springs, but I just, I didn't feel like commuting. I could work just as successfully from home because the team I was on was actually very distributed. That company has offices all over the world, actually, but including several across the United States. So most of the people on my team, they either work from home or they work from a different office. So to me, whether I was in the office or whether I was physically at home, they were still remote. So, why go in when I can be just as productive here? So uh, my new job, they sent everybody home because of the virus. I actually lost my job in April, so I had to find a new job. So my new job, they were not used to onboarding people completely remotely. So that was interesting. I was fine with it, but it was a little bit of a challenge for them. Um, and then so 3 jobs ago, prior to my last job, that company was actually headquartered in Kentucky, on the not quite the East Coast, but on the eastern side of the U.S., 2 hours ahead of me. So that was when I started. So I started completely remotely. It was me, and the CEO was actually, he and his wife were moving out to Colorado. Eventually, they moved the company out to Colorado. Mailing address wise, a lot of the people stayed back in Kentucky. And then I worked in the office when they moved it out here. But for the most part, I was remote. So like I said, on and off. So I really like working from home. It means that, if I need to make a phone call to, health insurance or, whatever, I can do that, and I don't feel weird about it. Obviously, I'm going to get my work done. I'm going to, if I have to bill 8 hours, I'll bill 8 hours. That's not an issue. It just might not be a continuous 8 hours. And then I don't have the stress of trying to figure out, okay, let me shift everything earlier so at the very end of the day I can make this phone call, or let me do that at the beginning of the day and then, work late. I can just kind of work when I'm inspired to work and feel comfortable with it. And when I need a break, that's when I make a phone call to whoever, or, walk around outside, whatever it is.
And how do you deal with distractions?
Sorry, say that again.
How do you deal with distractions during the day?
I don't have very many distractions because I have, that's the distractions right there. Distractions. That's the distraction word. But other than that, I don't really have many distractions because this is a room that's completely dedicated to be my office and the music room, but my office mostly. And my wife has the same sort of thing. So we each have a room in the house that is dedicated to being our office. And that way we're not like sitting in the kitchen and get distracted. Oh, there's dirty dishes. Let me do that. And I think that's one of the big things that, back when everybody started working from home, everybody started doing their like top 10 work from home tips. And I figured, why not? Sure. I've worked from home before. I have some thoughts. Sure, I'll put together a YouTube video. And I think that might have actually been my first YouTube video on my channel. So, yeah. And one of my tips, I don't remember if it was number 1 or number 2 or something like that, but it was basically have a dedicated workspace so that you avoid the distractions.
Okay.
Welcome, Bill.
What?
We've got another attendee.
Yeah, Bill. How are you, Bill? His microphone is on mute.
Yeah, I don't know if you're talking, Bill, but you're on mute. But welcome. And it is a little bit after the starting time, so I'll wait a couple more minutes. We can continue chatting. But this topic for this month is really going to be kind of informal. I have some thoughts on it, but I really did want it to be more of a discussion of, kind of what are your questions on what is out there in the world of PHP that you can actually do and make money on, what are your thoughts on things you would like to make money on in the world of PHP. So that's kind of the vision for tonight, and we'll get started here in just a minute. He doesn't have a mic. Okay, well, Bill, we're so glad you're here, even if you can't chat by voice. But yeah, if you have questions, thoughts, I'll pull the chat up so I can actually see the whole screen, and feel free to type stuff as we're talking, and thoughts, questions. We'll make sure they get included in the chat, in the discussion. So I'm not really sure who all will come tonight. it usually I'm kind of tracking like exactly how many people are going to attend or have RSVP'd. But this month I kind of figured, whoever comes, whoever shows up, that's great. Typically there have been fewer people showing up than RSVP'd. I'm not sure if just because of the nature of, maybe it's harder to remember to log on, to click the link and join, or, maybe, Thursday nights people get busy. Not exactly sure what it is, but, any discussion is valuable, and we'll go with whoever shows up.
Yeah. And I think next time you can include the Zoom link on the event description.
So I'm just doing what Meetup does, and I think the way they want it to be is you don't see the link unless you RSVP. Because I know they've had issues in the past with kind of spammers crashing Zoom meetings and that sort of thing. I think that's probably a good idea, but yeah, maybe I'll send out an email to the group a couple days beforehand with the Zoom link. So even if people haven't RSVP'd, because realistically, everybody from home, it doesn't really matter how many people show up. There might be a limit on my Zoom account, but I don't think we're going to reach that. We're not tracking attendees for how much pizza to order or anything like that. So yeah. So I think it's 5 minutes past 6:30 here in Colorado. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll just kind of spend a few minutes, hopefully not too long, talking about my thoughts on the topic, and then we can kind of go from there. And thoughts, questions, everything's fair game. We've got time, so as long as the discussion goes, it goes. If we get tired of the discussion and want to sign off for the evening, or I don't know what time it is in Kenya. It's
3 in the morning.
It's 3 in the morning. Okay,
yes.
So if you decide that it's way past your bedtime and you really need to sleep, we can do that.
It's okay. I wanted to check out this discussion, so I'll make the time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, that's dedication right there. Getting up at 3 in the morning to come to a meetup on the other side of the world. That's pretty awesome. I have to say this is kind of a momentous occasion for me, because this is the first time someone from that far away from Colorado has come to one of these, and it's kind of cool that it's possible because we're forced online. So thank you for coming. This is awesome. I really hope this is going to be an awesome conversation.
Much welcome, and I hope to learn a lot.
Awesome. So yeah, my thoughts on it are, and kind of the reason that I wanted to do this topic is because I am not a full-time PHP developer in my day job. So I talk to a lot of people day to day who either haven't written PHP or don't write PHP or just haven't in a while, and don't really know what's going on. So I frequently hear questions like, PHP, that's a great language to start with, but once you become a real programmer, you go off onto another language, right? Or PHP is so old. Do people actually use PHP anymore? And the answer is yes. People do use PHP. I mean, I'm not doing it on a day-to-day, full-time, but a couple of jobs ago, like we were talking before, the company that was headquartered in Kentucky, and I started out remote. I was the tech guy. I was hired to be the programmer, and I decided to use PHP because it was the strongest language in the environments that I needed it to run in. And so yes, technically I made the decision to use PHP, but at the same time, yes, I was making money writing PHP. Because at the end of the day, it is still a programming language. It is still powerful. It can do just as much, if not more, than some of these other programming languages that maybe are real programming languages. And it is very accessible to people who maybe have never seen a programming language before, or have only worked with content management systems, right? very big pathway for people, not just into the world of PHP, but in some cases just beginning to program, is they start building WordPress sites. They start downloading plugins and finding out what all that is and configuring the plugins and then adding fields to things and building their own content types. Or it's been a while since I did WordPress, so I might be butchering the terms, but and then they get into actually building their own plugins and getting into that. And you know, WordPress is, some people might call it like baby PHP. It's not the whole wide world of PHP, right? It's very specific. Call this function and it does this thing. Name your function this and it gets called at this point in the life cycle, or at this point when the page is loading. So it's not necessarily everything that you could do, but it's kind of a nice little sandbox where you can kind of get used to PHP, and then go from there. I forget where I was going with that, but essentially the answer is yes, you can make money on PHP, and PHP is a full-fledged language. You can do whatever you want with it. So there's certainly be a developer and you can make money doing PHP. Find a shop that uses PHP for their product. I think there's at least 2 in town. Bill says he started in ASP, and then when he went on his own, he went to PHP LAMP. Yeah, I mean, that's probably not an uncommon pathway, right? Because back in the day, ASP, so this is a little bit before my time, but I think ASP, you still had to use IIS, right? Which meant you had to pay Microsoft money. And that was kind of your best scenario for running ASP. Yeah, Microsoft, yep. So it was the Microsoft stack. You wrote your ASP and had to run Microsoft stuff. But if you're on your own and don't, either want to pay Microsoft or don't have the budget to pay Microsoft, PHP is a great choice, because especially back then, it was a very similar paradigm, right? You still have the opening tags. Instead of the angle %, it's angle question mark, more or less the same. There's still, instead of angle % equals, you have angle question mark equals in PHP. It's script oriented. You have things like include. It's very start at the top of the file, work your way down, include as necessary, that sort of thing. ASP did have some more functionality around like building an application, but I think PHP kind of had analogs at the time. This is, back in the days of PHP 4 probably. And then obviously Microsoft went to ASP.NET, which is, I'm probably going to offend somebody with this, but it's basically like web programming for desktop developers, right? It was really web programming for VB6 developers. And PHP doesn't have that. PHP is still very script oriented, but from the beginning, PHP has always been of the mindset that even though every single request, it has to spin up some part of the runtime, that part should be super fast, so that you can kind of go quick and dirty through the request. You build up whatever you need, you process whatever you need, and then at the end of the request, it all gets blown away, so you don't have to worry about memory management, right? So technically, I think PHP is garbage collected, but the whole premise of the way it was built to get spun up on every single request is that the garbage collector never really gets a chance to run. It's just the request is spun up, done so fast that it just gets blown away, and no memory leaks get left around. Whereas with an application-oriented framework, like now you have Node.js, I think even some of the Python frameworks are that way, but definitely the ASP.NET is very application-oriented. You do have to keep an eye on memory leaks and reference accounts and that sort of thing. Make sure you're not allocating too much memory, even though they are, I think all of them are garbage collected languages. So eventually, if there's no references, it'll go away. But you still have to make sure that you remove all the references to everything you're using and are now done with. So all that to say, yeah, there's a definitely you can make money doing PHP by working for a company where the product is built in PHP, or building your own product and using PHP, right? And then you can, I mean, entrepreneurship is always a pathway to making money. Well, I should say successful entrepreneurship is always a pathway to making money at whatever you want to do, right? Obviously, if you build a company and it never makes any money, you don't make any money, so you're not making any money on PHP. Even if you don't use PHP, you're not making any money. So yeah, I can ramble on about that for way too long. The other kind of pathway that I think about is kind of more of the WordPress, Drupal, I guess Joomla, but basically, you know, going the kind of the CMS route. So there's certainly a market for kind of site building, more advanced site building that gets into the territory of web applications, because most people don't just want a static website. Bill's been using PHP for 10 years. Awesome. And most people want something even beyond just a blog. You know, WordPress kind of out of the box is it just provides the blog functionality, but it's very extensible. So they usually want to add something to it. They might want to add, you know, polls, or I don't know. I'm at a loss for examples, but you know, that people generally want a little bit more out of their website, and WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, all of those certainly support that. And there are plenty of shops that you know are into the site building or even the site development, and they might call it slightly different things depending on the market that they're going after. But basically what it is taking one of those platforms and adding plugins to it, and then building their own plugins to achieve certain specific functionality. And that's kind of the high level. Obviously, we could get into like all the different little nuanced industries like e-commerce and you know, blogging and social media and all that stuff. But realistically, I think that's more, hey, it applies to every industry, but there are really kind of two main forks to get there. You work with small businesses and now want their company online via web. Yeah, so that's honestly, I think that's probably the most underserved market, and that's a really hard market to crack. So that commendable that you're doing that, and you know, I hope you you know, continue to have great success down that road, because that really, I think, is an area that tends to be ignored by a lot of products. You regardless of you know, platform stack, what they do, you kind of have the two ends of the spectrum. You have companies that build really tiny things. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I just can't hear you. My headset decides that if nothing's playing through the actual headphones part, that I must just be talking to myself, and it turns that off. So I couldn't hear you. You could hear me, but I couldn't hear you. So yeah, so exactly, Bill. Yeah, so you get either these companies that build, you know, a small little widget that you pay, you know, $5 a month, $10 a month, something like that. You know, not that much for, but it doesn't do a whole lot. And then you get the, you know, the enterprise systems that do everything, and then the kitchen sink, and are ridiculously expensive. But you've got this middle tier, this, you know, kind of the small to medium businesses that really are looking for something more than the little tiny thing. And ideally, they don't just want to buy a whole bunch of little things and then put them all together themselves, because that's not their competitive edge. That's not what they do. They want something that does a little bit more than that, but they're not an enterprise, so they're not going to pay for a Salesforce or an SAP or something like that that's ridiculously expensive compared to their budget, and does 20, 30 times more than what they're actually trying to do. They're just trying to ship stuff out and support 30 employees and keep their growth going and keep making money on it. They're not looking to turn into a 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, 50,000 million person operation, where something like Salesforce might make sense. But yeah, so kind of mini soapbox there. But I think that's actually a great opportunity. Either doing it like you're doing, Bill, or working for a company that kind of has that as its focus. I think that's a big market that probably not a lot of people are or I know not a lot of people are going into. But at the same time, it is kind of a hard market to sell into. So if you found, and I'm not a salesperson, and maybe that's why I feel like it's a hard market to sell into. I am definitely an engineer, like day in, day out, I am an engineer. Yes, I'll sell things to people, but it helps if they kind of already know what they want. And if I, no, but when they have more than one store, they can log into either store. Okay. Yeah, so sorry, lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that? Completely drawn a blank. Yeah, so I think, so hard market to sell into. Because every small business is a little bit different, right? With the enterprise thing, even though every enterprise is also different, every enterprise also has like a larger budget, so they can buy 50% more than they actually need. And it's a hard sell, but it's a vertical. Okay, so yeah, that makes sense. If you can find some commonality between the companies that you're selling into. So if you could focus on doctor's offices, or small boutiques, or something like that, and have kind of a something that's, maybe you pitch it as off the shelf, but it might be a little more custom than that. Or start with a kind of an off the shelf base, and and by the way, we can customize it to your particular what makes you different. I'm actually thinking of, I keep seeing this guy show up in my LinkedIn feed. You work with pawn shops. And now has gone into medical shops. So cool. Yeah. And I think pawn shops is probably, going way into the underserved. Like, from my perspective, at least, I don't even think of pawn shops when I think of like, what stores are out there? Oh yeah, pawn shops. So I imagine they're probably very underserved, because there's definitely a stigma around them, right? You assume that the people don't necessarily have a lot of money going into the pawn shop, so the pawn shop must not have a lot of money. But I think that's actually wrong. I think pawn shops actually do pretty well for themselves. And the Wild West of the finance industry, totally. Yeah. Yeah, wow, that could spawn a whole new conversation. But yeah, so that's definitely kind of an area that I think most people don't really think of, that if you understand how they operate and what their needs are, and can deliver the tools to help them do business better, then that's a great opportunity, and it's like perfectly cut out for you, because I imagine that's probably not a highly contested space. So that's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, I'm glad you've carved out that little part of the world for yourself. That should do well for you. So anyway, it reminded me of this. Cool, and there's the link right there. So there's a guy who keeps showing up in my LinkedIn feed, who I'm going to try to summarize his value proposition. I'm probably not going to do it nearly as well as he would, but basically his pitch is that Starbucks is selling the crap out of local coffee shops because local coffee shops don't have an app. They don't have mobile ordering. They don't have, that sort of, quick transactional experience that Starbucks does. So you can buy your coffee before you even get there. And he has an app that he sells to, and it sounds like it's basically a, 80% of it is similar across all of the apps that he sells to all of these different local coffee shops. And then the remaining 20% is customized to that particular coffee shop. So look and feel, and then obviously it's an app, so he gets it through the app stores and that sort of thing. So by essentially doing the same sort of thing for every single place, he can bring that combined experience. So it's not, each individual coffee shop having to figure out all of these things, like how to take payments through the app all for themselves. So they get immense value out of it. And it's also an underserved market because the most of these coffee shops, you think each individual cup of coffee, it's what, between $2 and $5 depending on what you buy. Sorry, I'm not aware of the currency transfer to Kenya, but think of how much a cup of coffee costs in Kenya. I'm assuming it's on the cheaper end of things.
Yes, it's definitely on the cheaper end of things. It's about $2.
Okay, so it's pretty comparable. So you think about that and you think, oh, a coffee shop, they're not going to have any money to spend on technology. But if you think they're selling, hopefully the successful ones, they're selling hundreds of cups of coffee and hopefully thousands. That starts to add up, and they actually do have that money, and enabling people to buy before they're even at the coffee shop, that multiplies that even more. So I think it's kind of in the same vein as the pawn shops, honestly. Something where most people think of it as something that's a fairly cheap game, but realistically they actually do pretty well for themselves. They're not Google. They're not going to turn into Google anytime soon. But they still hold their own. They're financially viable, and they're going to stay that way. Even in 2020, with what we're dealing with now, people still do need their coffee. Certainly some coffee shops are a little bit scaled back, but people are still getting coffee. I mean, I drive around. I don't drive around much because I can work from home, but when I drive around, when I go to get groceries and that sort of thing, the roads are maybe not as packed as they were before, but there's a fair amount of traffic there. So people are out and about. People are going to be getting coffee. You'd like to build out an app. Probably not the right forum to talk about apps, because I mean, sure, you can build kind of a mobile website and then wrap it in something like PhoneGap and use PHP for the website. But I'm not aware of any mobile frameworks that use PHP directly. That would be interesting if someone built that. Actually, I don't know if the use case is there, but you're probably, if you go the native route, you're going to be using Java or Kotlin on Android. Swift probably now. I guess you could try Objective-C, but Swift probably on iOS. If you go the cross-platform route, what do I recommend? It's been several years since I've been in the mobile app game. Back when I was doing it, I definitely recommended still doing native apps. This was before Kotlin really got a foothold. I think it was fairly new at the time. I'm pretty sure it existed, but I don't think it was the thing to do. At that time, I definitely recommended native. Xamarin Forms, which at the time Xamarin was their own company, and their business model was providing a C# platform that allowed you to build a mobile app and then run it on both iOS and Android. And it was at least semi-native when it compiled. It definitely used all the native APIs. So there, you could actually see it in the C# API if you got into some of the like the iOS specific stuff. It was named exactly what the iOS APIs were called. So that was cool. Flutter. I've heard Flutter. This is at least the second or third time in the last week or so that I've heard of Flutter, and I need to learn more about it. I've been in C# for a long time. I've been, you know, kind of inundated with all the Microsoft stuff. So now that Microsoft owns Xamarin, or they either own it outright or they're majority owner, Xamarin has come a long way. Xamarin Forms is kind of the way I would go if I were going to do that, because I'm kind of on the Windows side of things. Flutter, I do want to check out. I want to know more about that. I've also thought about doing something like PhoneGap, because occasionally I'm a web programmer for the most part. So I end up with something that's either a website that I can make into a mobile website, or kind of make a mobile website from the get-go. And then something like PhoneGap kind of makes sense because I can turn it into an app. I can just wrap it in PhoneGap and boom, it's an app, and submit it that way. But I don't know. There are a lot of good technologies. There basically, over the last, I'd say 5 years, there have been a lot of technologies that are basically, they follow a very specific pattern. It's, you're an X developer, but you want to do Y, right? So you get things like Blazor on the Microsoft side, which is, you're a C# developer, but you want to do JavaScript. Don't do JavaScript, just write C# for the browser. You know, PhoneGap is, you're a JavaScript developer, or you're a web developer and you want to build a mobile app. Build your website and make it mobile friendly, and boom, you also have a mobile app. Yeah, Xamarin Forms. You're a C# developer, but you want to build a mobile app. Just write C# and boom, you have a mobile app. So, you know, it's, in any of these conversations, I think you can find something that's, hey, you're a X developer and you want to do Y. There's a thing for that. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to let you guys ask questions, post comments. I know I've been kind of, you know, pulling things in from the chat as you guys have been chatting back and forth and bringing them into the conversation. But yeah, go ahead.
Yes. How long have you been working with PHP?
That's a good question. I started working with PHP. I learned it over Easter break in my junior year of high school, which would have been, let's see, 2005, so 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah. I haven't been paid to write PHP that whole time. The first real project that I did that someone else used was at the end of my junior year. That's why I was reading the PHP book, was to build this project. My high school wanted it was pitched to me as they wanted to give their teachers a blog. What they really wanted was a way for the teachers to be able to post updates, you know, not unlike a blog. I mean, that part was true, but kind of more on the line of assignments. So, you know, every day in class, they might, you know, lecture on whatever, and then the assignment was read chapter 3, or, you know, do problems 6 through 10 at the end of the chapter or something like that. So they could post that online, and that was all available for the students to access. The code for that is actually available on my GitHub. I'm pretty sure it's on my GitHub. So I run my own GitLab server that I have some of that stuff. I think it is on GitHub. So github.com/bparks. my first initial and my last name. If you, it was called SIMS, Student Information Management System. Do not use the code. It was written, again, 15 years ago, back in an age when things like SQL injection were, people knew about it, but people didn't really care about it. So again, and it was the first thing I ever wrote that was meant for consumption by someone else, that someone else would use. So I didn't actually get paid for it, but someone else did use it. So that's where I started. That was 15 years ago. I'm pretty sure the only, so I had 2 jobs where I actually got paid for PHP. One was I started my own company doing consulting, building custom applications, web applications for people. This goes back to the I am not a salesperson. That's why I'm not still doing that. And the second one was the I guess 2 jobs ago now. The company that was out in Kentucky, where I built their whole tech stack and used PHP because at the time it was the right thing to use for what they needed it for.
Okay, and would you advise someone to move from PHP to any other language? For example, Go, which I think has been gaining traction for the last year or so.
So sorry, which language did you say specifically?
I've been seeing a lot of people using Go.
Go, yeah. Go has been gaining a lot of popularity, and it's actually, I'd say it's a language to watch. I'm not diving headfirst into it. I actually did a video on my YouTube channel a month or 2 ago. I had never really used Go, maybe for one kind of side project or something like that, but I didn't remember anything from it. So I figured, okay, let's learn Go. I actually asked people who do write Go, maybe not for a living now, but have written Go extensively. Hey, I'm thinking about learning Go. What should I learn from? What resources should I use so that I can get the Go idioms and kind of learn how Go is supposed to work. And it was kind of rushed, so I don't think I did as good of a job learning the Go idioms as I could have. It definitely has some interesting functionality to it, interesting features in the language. And I think it definitely has a strong following, good community, lots of stuff is built for it. It's open source from the beginning, like everything is open source. So I'm sure that's going to turn away some of the more like enterprisey customers that don't want anything to do with open source other than like use it on their computers, right? Because I don't think you can run a computer these days that isn't running some open source software on it. But yeah, I think Go definitely has some potential. And it's going to go somewhere. Pardon the pun. But yeah, so I think Go has some potential. As far as using PHP, not using PHP, switching from PHP, all of these different languages exist for a reason. They're not just like, I'm going to build a language and, people are going to use it. People don't just learn languages, just for the hell of it. I mean, some of us do, but we don't start using languages just because, I'm bored. I'm going to write this thing in some language nobody's ever heard of. No, we try to find the right tool for the job. And that's really what all these languages are. So I still think PHP has a purpose in the world. I think it's trying, and rightfully so, to kind of figure out what its purpose is in kind of the next generation. And this, Bill, I see your question, what is the future of PHP? I think this is the future of PHP. I think it kind of needs to figure out what's next in the world of of computing. So there are, there are a bunch of big languages now, right? Go, Python, Ruby, C#. Did I say Python already? I think I did.
Yeah.
Java, I guess people still write Java. I don't write Java anymore, but people do still write Java. And each one of those has kind of its own little foothold. You could even include Swift and Kotlin in there because they're not huge on the general scene, but they are very purpose built, right? If you're going to write an iOS, an iPad app, even a Mac app, write it in Swift, right? If you're writing an Android app, write it in Java or Kotlin. Those are kind of your choices by default. If you're running on a Microsoft stack, write C#. I run on a Linux stack, but I'm really impressed with .NET Core, so most of the time I'm writing C#. And I think that's partially because when I started building these, at the time they were side projects and they kind of grew into a little bit more, I was doing C# as a day job. So to use C# for the side projects, it just kind of made sense. That said, I do still write PHP. PHP is fantastic for little prototyping things like little utilities. I'll still use PHP, especially if they have a web component. Because with C#, I need to build a project. I need to go through compilation. If I just have a PHP file, I can just start writing PHP and then hit it with the browser, and boom, it does something. I don't have to compile, deploy, don't have to do anything heavy-handed like that. I just write it and I'm done with it. Sometimes it gets me into trouble where I start editing code in production, but you end up with good points and bad points. All languages have their good things and their bad things. So I think it really boils down to what you plan to do and what the opportunity is and what tool is right for the job. I think it's definitely valuable to know PHP, but it just be okay with knowing that PHP might not always be the right tool for the job. And then Bill, to get more into what I think the future of PHP is, one of the things that I'm really excited about that's coming out in PHP 8, which I think is supposed to be at the end of this year, November or something like that, is something called Foreign Function Invocation. I think that's what it stands for. It's FFI. It's a feature in PHP 8. I have not played around with it because the betas of PHP 8 right now are very beta. But it seems like it's going to make the interface between PHP and like C libraries a lot more streamlined. So right now, in order to use a C library from PHP, you actually have to build a PHP module wrapper around it. And that's kind of a painstaking process. That said, there are a lot of PHP libraries out there that are basically wrappers around C libraries. And that's where a lot of the PHP APIs that we know and love came from. The MySQL stuff, right? The original MySQL interface. There's the reason the way to connect to MySQL, the recommended way to connect to MySQL using that API is called MySQL_pconnect, is because the C function to do the same thing is called MySQL_pconnect. It's just a very lightweight wrapper, a very thin wrapper around the C library. But this is I'm excited for it. I think it'll be really cool. I actually want to try PDO. Yeah, now you use the PDO stuff. Yeah, or MySQLi, right? There's the object-oriented interface directly to MySQL. PDO gives you access to a lot more engines, and we've kind of moved away from the C names, so it's become more object-oriented, which is cool. I think that's good. I think that's progress and moving in the right direction. But I think foreign function invocation is going to enable PHP to be kind of hold its own against things like Python. If you're, leveraging C APIs. I don't know if Ruby really does that. I mean, you could do that in C#. You can do p invoke, but again, once you get into C#, you do have the heavy build process. It's less of a scripting language, right? But it's not a scripting language. But I think that back in the day, there was a big movement to write Perl and leverage TK to build GUI apps. So what I want to see, and actually, as PHP 8 gets closer to being released, I'll try to do a talk for this meetup and hopefully demonstrate this sort of thing. But take PHP, use foreign function invocation, and plug into, I'm hoping not GTK+, because I really don't like GTK+, but something like WX widgets or Qt would be my preference. I really like the Qt API, but basically use PHP to write a GUI app by leveraging those APIs directly through foreign function invocation. I think that's an area that PHP can really say, hey, we can do this, and it's awesome, and this is why you want to do it. Yeah, so better said, how do you choose to learn what? Hang on, let me take a drink of water real quick. That's actually a really good question. I'm gonna have to think about that for a second. So I try to be aware of lots of things that are going on in the world of computing. Even if I don't know them extensively, I try to know a little bit, at least, about each thing. So, before I did this video about Go, that was kind of my deep dive, even though it wasn't very deep. It was like I got in the pool. It was not just sticking my toes in. It was actually, jumping into the pool. But before I even did that, I did a little bit of research on why other people used Go. I'd heard about Go. I knew that some people used it. I knew that people liked it. Okay, so why do people use Go? Why do people like it? What is there? What makes it different from, other languages? And I came across a few different things. For one, you build a Go application, and it gives you one binary, and that the project that I picked to use Go for, that was actually a very attractive point. I wanted to have a single binary that I could basically copy around from machine to machine. I didn't want to have to worry about dependencies or making sure a bunch of DLLs were installed in the right place or shared objects or whatever. I just wanted a single executable that I can move from machine to machine. So that made it very attractive. It is garbage collected. That made it less attractive to me. I'm not a huge fan of garbage collection, but that's a conversation for another day. And maybe not a conversation for a PHP meetup, because again, PHP is garbage collected. Again, I'm pretty sure PHP is garbage collection. Let's see, what else? Go has this thing called Go routines, which is kind of a new paradigm, maybe not even a new paradigm, but a kind of a different paradigm for thinking about thread synchronization, or threads and synchronization, I guess is a better way to say it. That was interesting. I wasn't sure I was actually going to use that in that project. Turns out that I did to a little bit of a degree, because I was dealing with other processes, actual other processes, and I needed to kind of get standard out, standard error, and be piping things to standard in of that process all at the same time. So I did end up using some Go routines and some channels. And I think there were a couple other things that I found as I was going through it. But ultimately, you know, that was kind of the very thin layer of, you know, what is this thing and why might someone care? And then from there, that was years ago. Like I did that research several years ago and never really found the right project to learn Go until, you know, this project came along. And that's also on my GitHub page. It's called Whiskey. The problem that I was trying to solve was, and the reason it's called Whiskey is because I was drinking whiskey at the time when I realized that I had this problem. And you know, as I got into it, I kind of joked to myself, you know, what makes every deployment easier? Whiskey, obviously. So there's that. But yeah, so the idea is basically you can kind of script your deployments, especially web development is really what I designed it for. So that I can script them, you know, build the thing and then deploy it somewhere else, and then put it in the right place, restart Nginx or whatever I need to do. Rather than writing this whole big script every single time, I realized that all of my deployment scripts had the same types of functionality in them. And so, you know, why not build a framework around it? So that's what I ended up doing. Yeah, so that's how I ended up learning Go. So yeah, I don't know if there's necessarily a process for how I choose to learn what. I think it's more, you know, use case dependent, depending on what you're looking at doing. If you are aware of a tool that's well suited for that, use that tool. If you think there might be a better tool out there, maybe there is. Maybe someone's built a tool that's designed specifically for the problem that you're trying to solve, and you just haven't found it yet, and that's fine too. You could definitely kind of go too far the other extreme and know not enough about a lot of things. So there are definitely some things that I've specifically said, you know what, I'm not going to learn that. Like right now, I've kind of stepped back from the JavaScript community because there's just way too much going on there. You know, I used to use Express. I guess I kind of still do when I'm doing like Node.js type stuff, but apparently that's not the new hotness anymore. I had a conversation with someone recently where I talked about having used Express. They were like, oh, we use this other thing. I don't remember what it's called, but it was like, you know, Express is so 5 years ago. We use this other thing, which is newer and better. And, you know, oh, okay, great. But I haven't really been in the JavaScript community recently, so I don't know what that is. What is the future of AI and web development? This is the $1 million question, isn't it? So again, everything to me is a tool. So AI is just another tool. And I don't think AI as a tool is necessarily unique to web development or desktop development or something like that. And AI, even AI itself is kind of a broad topic. So actually, the reason that I moved to Colorado, I was doing some computer vision stuff, specifically face recognition. Now, all of that is lumped in with AI. Back then, it was still like I did face recognition. That was a field that was big enough in itself to say this is something specific that I do, and you know we talk about it. Now, you know, it's lumped in with AI. Machine learning is something that I kind of dabbled in while I was doing that, because technically the face recognition is a classification problem. It combines elements of image processing, turning pictures of faces, finding the faces, and B, turning the pictures of faces into, you know, a series of numbers that actually might mean something to the determination of who this person is. But after that point, it is a machine learning problem, which is definitely now lumped in with AI. It's basically given this set of numbers, does it fall into this bucket or this bucket? You know, is it this person or that person? So, Bill, that question is pretty broad, and I don't know if I can give a concrete answer to it. I think there definitely is a future. for AI and web development, but it's going to be, you know, use case driven. So if your web app or mobile app or, you know, whatever you're building a web app for, needs to leverage some, you know, machine learning, AI, image processing, object detection, you know, something like that, then there will be tools. There already are tools to do that. So you can use some of the services built into like AWS and Azure, or there are libraries that do that. So Google's TensorFlow, that's the one I can think of right now. I know there are a few others, and depending on your, you know, your platform, you can use the right tool for the job. How would it help each user use the program? I mean, that really depends on what your app is doing. So I've seen situations where it helps users kind of guide them through the program, help indicate like what parts of it might be useful to them or what they might want to use next, based on how they've used it previously. So that is technically AI. A big topic is like chatbots, and that has elements of natural language processing. It has elements of machine learning classification. Yeah. So hopefully that answered your question, or gave you more to go on. Is that in PHP? I don't think any of the libraries. I don't think any of the libraries are written in PHP, but they're all designed to be accessed from whatever language you're using. So yeah, you can use it from JavaScript. I think TensorFlow is mostly C and C++, but it's, you know, it's shipped to you as a library, as a compiled library. So you don't have to write C or C++. You can you know, run PHP and talk to it. In PHP 8, you do have the foreign function invocation, so you can talk to it more or less directly. I'm sure at this point someone's written a wrapper around something like TensorFlow. There are certainly libraries to talk to the services, the ones that are built as services in Azure and AWS. AWS definitely has a pretty good PHP SDK, PHP library. Azure, I'm not sure. I haven't used Azure with PHP as much. I'm a lot newer to Azure. Over the last 2 months or so, I've done more of a deep dive into Azure. So, yeah, JavaScript is definitely kind of the new hotness, and you know, the favorite for everybody as far as languages are concerned. So there's whatever library you're looking for, there is probably a version of it or a wrapper for JavaScript, so that you can use it from at least Node.js, if not the browser. So, more questions, thoughts? Well, I really like talking code. So if you have questions or anything else you want to talk about, Azure, A-Z-U-R-E. It's azure.microsoft.com, microsoft.com/Azure. If you search for Azure, you'll find it, A-Z-U-R-E. Yeah, it's in the chat. Yeah, it's kind of, I'm sure the Microsoft people are going to cringe when I say this, but it's like Microsoft's version of AWS. So there's a lot of similarities, but there are definitely some differences. Google even has their own thing. They call it Google Cloud because, you know, let's make things easy. Leader in the space is AWS and Google Cloud. Yeah. Yep. Azure, Microsoft is making a big push with Azure. Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, he came from the cloud services division of Microsoft before he became CEO. So that's always been something that he's been pushing the last, what is that, 5 years, 6 years? I don't know how long he's been CEO, but they've been pushing that a lot. And I think it does. There are some things about Azure that I like a lot better than I like about AWS. But at the same time, you can tell AWS is a much more mature platform, even if the UI doesn't make it look like it is. Azure's got the UI down, but there are some elements of it that, like this morning, I ran into an issue where I resized a VM last night before I went to bed. This morning I woke up and tried to access the VM, and it was just inaccessible. Azure was like, yeah, it's up, you should be able to get to it, and it was just not there. So I went through some troubleshooting steps, and a couple, infuriating clicks later, it finally came back up and was accessible, but it was still, that was like half an hour or so that I didn't expect to spend troubleshooting the platform. The learning curve for Azure is a bit stiff compared to the other players. I would agree with that. Yeah. I have done no formal training with AWS. I just kind of jumped right in and started building things. I didn't really know if I was doing it right, but continued use kind of validated what I was doing. Azure, there are some things in there that you look at and you're like, I don't know what this is. What is this supposed to be? And then they have the billing structure is kind of maddening with Azure. There are certain services where within the service you kind of have like a toy box. Like, forget about sandbox. You're not ready for the sandbox. Like a toy box tier, and then a sandbox, and then production. And the pricing goes wonky. It's like the production stuff is super expensive, but then there's kind of in between, there's something that looks like it's in the sandbox tier-ish, but is like production-ish. It's okay. It might not be great, but it's production-ish. So it's kind of weird. I'm dealing with that with their SQL Server thing right now. They have a version that's just like a single SQL Server. Like, if you're running something on premise, it's like, I just want a box that's running SQL Server and be done with it. You could do that in Azure, but they kind of steer you toward the things they call it. It's like Azure Managed SQL Server or something like that, which what that really means is it's a cluster of SQL Server databases, and you pay like it's a cluster of SQL Server databases. So don't do that if you're doing Azure. But Microsoft has a lot of training, a lot of documentation on Azure, and I definitely recommend going through it, even if some of the screenshots that they have and some of the instructions that they have refer to an older version of the Azure portal. Going through that documentation and understanding how they intend you to use it definitely helps you get much further. Continuous delivery and integration tools that I use. I think I mentioned before that I run my own GitLab instance. I started running GitLab back in the days before GitHub was owned by Microsoft. So GitHub gave you unlimited public repositories, but you couldn't have any private repositories. And a lot of times when I start working on a side project, I don't know if I'm going to open source it. I don't know if I'm going to try to turn it into a business idea. I don't know if I want to just build it quick and dirty and have it riddled with security holes, because I really don't care about the quality of the code. I just need to get the job done. And I wanted something where I could have all that stuff, private. And I did want to get into continuous integration. I did want issue tracking, and I did want wiki. So GitLab, and I think from the very beginning, but certainly since I've been using it, had, oh, and I wanted it to be cheap and be able to run it myself. GitLab has an open source version. They call it a community edition, which means that I don't have to pay for it. I can run it on my own hardware. So that's two right there. It does, obviously, it does Git. Great. That was the main prerequisite. It does issue tracking. It had continuous integration built in. It has functionality for that. And it has wikis, which, that was kind of the icing on the cake. So it does everything I need it to. And I could pay for it and get even more, but as of right now, I don't pay for it. I don't need to pay for it. I don't need all that extra functionality. But that's what I use for continuous integration. So that the whiskey tool that I built, basically I have a stage in my CI pipeline that just calls that little binary with the configuration file, and it does its thing and deploys it where I need it to go. But then, yeah, all my builds, my tests, everything is scripted into that CI pipeline. Yeah. Any more questions? Anything else we want to talk about? Awesome. The highest traffic I've handled. Ooh, such good questions. So back, let's see, six years ago, I had maybe even longer ago than that, I inherited a Node.js app. This was back in the day, like Node.js was brand new. Express didn't exist. The guy who wrote it, he like wrote all this stuff himself. So it was basically just a Node.js app, and all that was available was the HTTP server library, or the HTTP server library. Everything else was homegrown. So at some point in the future, I'll go back through and like make it use Express or something like that, or whatever the new hotness is now, because Express is not it anymore. So, but it's a little tool that may or may not actually still work, because browsers have gotten a lot more secure. So cross-origin resource sharing and stuff like that. Basically what it does is it creates an overlay atop a website, and then you can draw on it. It doesn't deface the website in any way. The only way you see these drawings is if you have, it's a little bookmarklet, so not even a full-blown browser extension. It's just a little bit of JavaScript that when you click on the bookmark, it runs the JavaScript on the page, and gives you this environment where you can draw on the site. And if you go to dudl.me or dudl.us, I think the .us is the free version that it's really easy to kind of see what everybody's been drawing, and the .me version is intended as the pay version, where you can kind of do your own drawings in your own little sandbox and then share them with other people. Yeah, so dudl.us, Doodle. It's a little Node.js app, and at its peak, it had, I think, tens of thousands of requests per second. And I was amazed. I say 6 years ago because I was involved in the JavaScript meetup at the time, And one of the early talks, it was like, what is Node.js? So I figured I'd give a talk on what is Node.js. And so I brought up this little deal. And at the time I had traffic reports, traffic statistics that I would, I had little graphs that would automatically update. So I could actually watch how much traffic was going through it. And I think I have the numbers right. It was basically, that was the moment where I decided that PHP might not be the thing I use forever. Because I feel like if I tried to build that tool using PHP, it would never have been able to handle that much traffic. And this is not a like, oh, Node.js is awesome and PHP sucks, or Node.js is automatically better than PHP. It's just the way that Node.js allowed that site to be built, the kind of asynchronous event-driven nature, lent itself to being able to handle that many requests, because at any one time, not a lot of code needed to be running. Whereas PHP, each request is its own thread. It blocks until it's done, and then it goes back into the pool and that sort of thing. And a lot of this was, there really isn't much business logic to it. It's really just, yeah, on a single server. Yeah, it was one machine. And it was not a very powerful machine either. It was a VM. Yeah, I was amazed. I was blown away. It was like this, and it didn't even slow down. Like, I could still log onto the machine and do stuff, and it was running other applications. I had other PHP apps running on that same machine. Yeah, it was incredible. That's another rant for another day. Is like, we build apps all too often where we assume that machines have all this RAM and all these resources, and so we don't have to worry about memory management, and we don't have to worry about, you know, how many for loops we have going on. We can just, you know, write the code that solves the problem, and performance is someone else's problem. But no, just no. Like, we should all be, well, I mean, maybe this is kind of ridiculous, kind of extreme, but we should all be thinking about writing applications as if we're writing them on a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino. Like, pretend you have no resources. What would you do differently? Or in this case, if you're multi-tenant, right, you're running on the same machine as a bunch of other things, be respectful of memory, right? If you don't need 4 gigabytes of memory to do something simple, don't use 4 gigabytes of memory. Just, you know, so. What else is on your mind? I miss the pizza. I miss the pizza too. You know, hopefully in a few months, I'm not going to say next month because I don't think it's going to be next month, but hopefully in a few months we'll be back in person. And you know, I do really enjoy having people from the other side of the world on the call. This is great. I think even when we go back to in person, I might keep doing a Zoom meeting so that we can have people from wherever, you know, still be involved. But yeah, hopefully we'll be able to go back to Church Community Builder and have an in-person meetup one of these days. So yeah, and I think that's actually a good way to kind of wrap it up. Thank you guys both for coming, and hopefully next month we'll have more people. So yeah, tell your friends and coworkers, colleagues, you know, anyone else you know who's learning PHP or using PHP, or you think might be interested in talking code. I'm always up for talking code. You know, I think we talked about PHP for maybe 20% of the conversation, and I'm totally cool with that. But yeah, so this is Peak PHP. We do this every second Thursday of the month at 6:30 Mountain Time.